user score on Metacritic, as well as the reviews on Steam, as well as the Steam charts are all in for Dragon Age the Veilguard, which just released 2 days ago, and this whole situation cannot get more divisive at this point in terms of what people think about this game. And before we go into all of the reviews and the Steam charts and my thoughts on these things, thank you guys so much for almost 700 subscribers. My goal is to hopefully hit that by the end of the weekend. I really appreciate your guys' support on the channel. If you like gaming news and you like gaming reviews, specifically with RPGs and action-adventure type of games, and you like the video that you see here, please subscribe. It helps me out a lot. Now, let's get into the video. So diving right into the most divisive of them all, the Metacritic scores. The Metacritic scores obviously are inflated in terms of the overall critic reviews, and this is because I think a lot of these sites want to keep getting review codes from other games and want to stay in the good graces, so they're not going to give a game a 2 or a 3. It's just not going to happen, even if it is a 2 or 3. I don't think Dragon Age the Veilguard is by any means, and we'll get to that in a bit, but they're obviously going to give at least maybe like a 6 or 7 at the lowest, because they want to stay in the good graces of a lot of these companies, get review scores and put reviews out before the general public gets their hands on the games in order to keep generating money for their sites. That's what they do for a living. Now, so let's take a look at some of these user reviews, which is sitting right now at a 3.3 out of 10. Are people just coming in here and bombing the score as much as possible, or are they evaluating the game and giving it legitimate criticisms? Well, let's take a look. So the first one here that I can actually read, this is not in a language I can read unfortunately, is a 1 out of 10. He says it has awful dialogue, terrible writing, mediocre voice acting, and extremely boring gameplay. That this is not a Dragon Age game, but it's a generic slop action RPG for the modern audience. The only somewhat good thing in this game is the environment's occasionally good. All of the other visuals are completely uninspired, especially the enemies, and are decidedly not Dragon Age. Now, to break this down, he says it has awful dialogue, terrible writing, mediocre voice acting. Awful dialogue, whether you like the game or not, yes, the game's dialogue is definitely subpar. There are moments where it is definitely awful, and then other moments where it's okay, but at no point am I looking at the dialogue in this game and thinking that it's anything, better than other RPGs that are successful that are already out there. Terrible writing, that goes with the dialogue. They also did not write this game up to the tone of what I think Dragon Age should be or even is in the previous games, but also in this game as well. You have moments where this game is very dark in tone, like at the start where people are getting chucked off the ledges and immediately killed within 10 minutes of opening the game. You also have the Blight Town where people are all mangled up in the tentacles and corrupted. They have these black veins pulsating out of them, and it's very dark, and overall just a complete town corrupted by blight. You also have areas like Dogtown where it's very corrupt and very scammy in terms of what's going on in that area, and there's a lot of different beggars and people that are on the ground asking you for money, things like that, and overall people are just making jokes during it, and I think the writing and the dialogue goes with that, but overall, what they do in terms of the voice acting, I think they deliver it relatively well. I think everybody would say this game has very good voice acting if the writing and the dialogue was better with the characters. Going into the boring gameplay, I don't think this is necessarily true. I think the gameplay is very good for the most part, especially the combat. I have personally at least enjoyed a lot. I think it's pretty weighty, pretty impactful. There's a ton of different options within combat, as well as just the overall RPG progression as well. I think definitely just is improved throughout the entire game the more you go in it, which obviously it's supposed to be, but I think it was even better in some points than I was expecting, especially after my first 10 hours. I wasn't seeing much of that, so I do think the gameplay is also relatively good. Then they go on to say this is not a Dragon Age game, it's a generic slop action RPG for the modern audience, and obviously, although this is a Dragon Age game, they are right where it doesn't necessarily at times feel like a Dragon Age game, aside from the different lore references and returning characters they bring back, although it's definitely far removed from what we have known or we have seen from previous Dragon Age games, which obviously this being a reboot and that being probably something they were going for on purpose to get people that weren't a fan of the series or didn't play the previous games into this game to enjoy it. It kind of makes sense. But further in here, it says the only somewhat good thing in the game are the environments, occasionally good. I definitely agree with that. I think the environments are very beautiful. They are very distinct from the one previous. Doesn't really do it justice watching like a YouTube video, but when you're really in those environments and playing within the areas that they crafted, I think you will probably agree that the areas do look pretty damn good for the most part. And then at the end here, all the visuals are completely uninspired, especially the enemies, and are decidedly not Dragon Age. This I will definitely agree with in terms of the art style. Although I did get over it and it doesn't bother me as much as it did at the start of the game, it still is annoying, especially when you're seeing characters like Morgan, who you know and love and had a very distinctive look in the previous games, almost be unrecognizable if she didn't say her name was Morgan within the game. And honestly, I think this review is pretty legit, actually. I don't think this is just a bomb review, which we'll get to here in a second. But 1 out of 10, that's how he feels. I think a lot of other people that have reviewed the game have felt a similar way. Then you get to some other reviews here, which... This ain't a review of the game in any way. This is definitely a review bomb if I've ever seen one. And I know a lot of people are talking about the whole DEI in the game and everything, and I tend to stay away from that when I'm just talking about or reviewing games because, in my opinion, I genuinely think it can't make a bad game good and it can't make a good game bad. I've heard a lot of other YouTubers and content creators say that, and that's something I tend to agree with as well. I think it makes a lot more sense just to review the game based on what the game actually has to offer in terms of the gameplay, like the other guy did, the dialogue, the RPG elements, the environments, and how it looks and how it feels. I think that makes a lot more sense and will go a lot further in terms of feedback for the BioWare team or another developer. Another review here that I genuinely think is a legitimate review. He says 15 hours in, gave this game a fair shot. I think 15 hours is plenty enough time in this game to give it a fair shot, or any game. If you're not having fun or enjoying a game at least a little bit after 15 hours, just move on to the next game, in my opinion. But he says, I'm a longtime fan of BioWare. I don't know what I'm playing, but this is not a Dragon Age game. So echoing some of the same sentiments as the other guy, just this isn't the tone that they've come to know and love from Dragon Age, and it just doesn't feel like it's in the same universe, even though it is using obviously the same lore and a lot of returning characters. He says, forget the wool crap for a minute. So just like I was saying, let's review the game based on the dialogue, character interaction, and combat, but he says these are all lacking. And although I think the dialogue and character interaction are very lacking, I think the combat is good. I will defend the combat. I don't know if it gets stale after a long time, but I have definitely played 15 hours of this game so far, and at that point, I think the combat is very good. I'm personally playing a mage. I don't know how it feels on all of the other classes, but overall, I've been having a good time with the combat in the actual gameplay. Music is great. I definitely agree, although I actually think some of the music does annoy me from times, but the music overall is very good. And he says, I'm stopping here and I'm sending this back for a refund. He thinks BioWare is dead. Thankfully, he has a ton of other games to go back and play, and I hope BioWare is not dead from this. We will talk about the sales and how many the concurrent players are as of right now here in a second, but wanted to go through obviously these Metacritic reviews first because we are going to see something very different when we go through the Steam reviews. Now we get to the whole other side of the spectrum where this guy says it's a fantastic game, classic BioWare for the first time in over a decade, great graphics and combat, really just an improvement on Inquisition in every way possible. Ignore the snowflakes triggered by the word they. This is the one you've been waiting for. Now listen, this game is not a 10 out of 10. In any stretch of the imagination, I don't know how you can give this game a 10 out of 10. I don't even know how you give this game a 9 out of 10. I would definitely accept like a 6, 7, or an 8. I'm kind of leaning more towards the 6 or 7, and obviously I'm not done with the game, so that could all change, but I'm very far in, and I do not see any way someone could give this game a 9 or a 10 because of how bad the character interaction and dialogue is, which completely pulls you out of the immersion from times within an RPG that's founded and based on how immersed you are into the game. However, I do agree here that it has great graphics for the most part. I don't like the art style too much, but if you prefer that art style, you probably absolutely love the graphics because the scenery and the areas are beautiful. I agree with the combat as well, and I think this guy probably prefers action combat over tactical, which I think is why he didn't like Inquisition very much. But again, I don't think this game by any means is better than Inquisition in every way possible. I think Inquisition Inquisition did the tone better, Inquisition did the character interactions better, and if it wasn't for the monotony of Inquisition's open world, I think he would be pretty much wrong on most standpoints here. And then he says, this is the one you've been waiting for. I think it is overall a good game, but it's definitely not great, but I also definitely don't think it is bad. Then you have others where they're not reviewing the game at all, just basically trying to drown out the noise of people putting the zeros. So you have the same thing on both the negative and positive reviews here. And now we go over to Steam, and a lot of the same sentiments are being echoed here, but this has a 76% positive with over 8,000 reviews. So I think overall, without the review bombing on Metacritic with both the positive and negative, people are just absolutely attacking that, giving it a 10 or a 0 for any reason they want. There's not a lot of real reviews there. I think there are a lot of good reviews here. If you see this first one here, conflicted on whether I can recommend or not, because as a Dragon Age game, he can't recommend it, and as an RPG, he thinks it's alright. He's about 8 hours in, and it doesn't have the dark, gritty feeling of any of the Dragon Age games, although I do think there are moments where it does. The writing is very subpar, that's correct, and sometimes eye-rolling, definitely. The dialogue just overall feels very inauthentic. I definitely agree with that as well. That's one of the biggest reasons. It kind of treats you like someone who is too young or too stupid to understand the story, and it keeps hammering the same points over and over and over to you, to the point where it doesn't feel like you're a lot of times having real conversations with these companions. It's really disappointing that I found myself skipping through some of the dialogue because it's just boring. The game is, however, very pretty as an RPG, definitely. The combat is satisfying, however, can sometimes feel repetitive. Now, I do agree with this, but it hasn't gotten repetitive for me yet. I do think the combat is satisfying, but I could see if I wasn't playing my specific class, maybe it could get repetitive. I think it all just kind of depends as well on what you choose to play within the game. If you choose a higher, difficulty, it's probably even more repetitive because it's either taking a very long time potentially to kill these bosses with big health pools. All of that I definitely think is true. I'd say pick this up when it's on sale. I don't regret buying it. It feels like a fun RPG. However, aside from the political reasons, people have not been liking the game. The game just feels afraid to get as dark as a Dragon Age game should be. Absolutely. I think this is such a good point. I think it does feel afraid to kind of go where it needs to go to really have a bigger impact. But it's not a bad game by any means. With that said, I'll finish the game, then probably play Inquisition because I think that one deserves a second chance over this one, which is sad. Overall, I think that's one of the best reviews that we're probably going to get on Steam or Metacritic as a whole. So now lastly, I want to go into the Steam charts. You have people that are saying the game's great, people that are saying the game's horrible, and then finally I found, a couple reviews that are kind of in the middle and reviewing the game for what it is. However, I want to look at the Steam charts because this is what a lot of people are kind of looking at right now to talk about why the game is failing so poorly. And obviously, there's a couple things we need to preface here. The game released on a Thursday, on Halloween weekend. There are a lot of people that are probably going to come back and play this game, and you've already seen it go over 10,000 from what it previously was, which is like 75,000, just within the last few hours now that we're on, around dinner time on a Saturday. I would expect potentially even tomorrow for this game or tonight to probably get closer to the 100,000 mark. I don't know if it's going to hit it, but I think it's very likely that it could. But overall, why are they looking at this and saying it's failing? Well, the big reason is because I think people are looking at this and saying they have to make at least $250 million, right? No one actually knows how much this costed, but a lot of estimates for people that don't necessarily know actually how much this costed are saying that it's probably around $250 million. And I want to use that as the point to see if this is actually failing or not. So let's see how much money they have made so far, right? If there are 85,000 players on Steam, and yes, this is only on Steam, and this is around their peak, and they made $60 for each sale, which obviously this isn't going to be exactly correct. They didn't make a flat 60 on every single sale, obviously, but this is just an estimate. You have this at $5.1 million. Now, if you multiply this by 3, let's say there's the same amount of people playing it on PlayStation and PC, you're getting about $15.3 million. And both of these are nowhere close to the $250 million that I guess people really just made up as the estimate. But Inquisition costed $150 million, so I wouldn't be surprised if this one costed that much more. So obviously, $15 million is not going to cut it. It's nowhere near what they need to make a profit on this game. Obviously, this game is going to be sold a lot more over Christmas and a lot more over the next year, but there's not a lot of microtransactions, and this also doesn't include any of the extra additions. So overall, I would say, and I wouldn't be surprised if there was more players on PlayStation and Xbox, and with the higher up additions that people paid for, I wouldn't be surprised if they've already made maybe $30 to $40 million. Now, they also have to pay out PlayStation and Steam and Xbox and things like that, so who knows how much they actually sold, but I wouldn't be surprised if they made 30 to 40 million already. So all in all, time is going to tell whether this game succeeds or this game fails, and we don't know what these actual numbers are, and we probably won't until someone leaks it and it comes out from the studio about how much they made and how much it costed, which I wouldn't be surprised if we get relatively soon, just for the sole purpose of it usually happens with these big divisive games like this. Somebody leaks something. But I don't think this game is anywhere near bad enough to kill an entire studio. I think this was a generally good game for the most part. I'm not done with it yet. I'm going to put out my full review and talk about all the points here, but I definitely don't think it's a 10, and I definitely don't think it's anywhere near a 0 or even a 1 by any stretch of the imagination. This game probably sits between a 6 or an 8, which you're seeing on Steam for the most part, but obviously on Metacritic, you have people from both sides of things trying to push a 10 or a 0 just to offset each other. It's really annoying. You're not going to get a good review there from either the user or the critic score, I don't think. Thank you guys for watching the video. Like the video if you like the video. Comment down below how you've been liking the game so far. Do you agree that it's the worst or best game, or do you think it's somewhere in the middle, kind of like I do? On top of this, do you think it's going to be a success or fail? How much do you think it's made? How much do you think it costed to make this game? I would love to hear from you guys, and subscribe for more content like this. I really appreciate you guys for watching again, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace!